And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's January 22nd, the 22nd day of this new year. Just 343 days remain to the year's over with. We start a new one. Holidays and observances. Well, what is wrong here? There we go. Well, it's National Hot Sauce Day. Tingle your taste buds with this spicy condiment. National Answer Your Cat's Questions Day. Imagine explaining new places from the perspective of a cat. Noticing things you've never seen before. Clashing Clothes Day. Express yourself. Mix and clash. Don't be afraid to break the rules and mix unexpected patterns and colors. National Polka Dot Day. They add a touch of fun and whimsy to any dress. Celebration of Life Day. Nothing beats watching your child's face light up with joy as you create lasting memories with them. National Blind Brownie Day. Looking for a dessert that's sweet and chewy and delicious? Then you want to try out this popular baked good that's light in color and full of flavor. NASA's Day of Remembrance. It is stands as a solemn tribute to the brave individuals who lost their lives in the pursuit of space exploration. This annual observation honors the crews of Apollo 1, Challenger, and Columbia, as well as other members of the NASA family who perished while advancing the cause of discovery. Yes, if you were sitting in Apollo 1 as it took off, you were definitely going on an adventure. Roe versus Wade Day, coming from the cold day. Artes Mundi. Well, Farmhouse Breakfast Week, Cancer Talk Week, No Name Calling Week, National Fresh Squeezed Juice Week, World Kiwanis Week, Hunt for Happiness Week, and Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. Well, famous people born on this date: Logic, the rapper, and Gabriel Macht. That's one I have to say I haven't heard of before. All right. At this point, let's see what stories we have in the news. Well, President Trump and world leaders signed the Gaza Board of Peace Charter. President Trump unveiled the Board of Peace on Thursday, with world leaders signing on to pursue a lasting agreement for Gaza. He inaugurated the board during a speech and signing ceremony at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. He said in a statement, once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do, and we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations. This isn't the United States, this is for the world. I think we can spread it out to other things as we succeed in Gaza. He noted that most of the 59 leaders signed on to the deal are very popular, but others were not so popular, and that's just the way it goes, he said. Notably absent from that board was Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has said that Moscow is discussing membership with Russia's strategic partners. He's not a happy camper right now. Well, Jack Smith faces public grilling on Capitol Hill about the Trump prosecutions. Former special counsel Jack Smith is set to appear Thursday on Capitol Hill for a televised hearing, in which he's going to face questions from House Judiciary Committee Republicans and Democrats about his two prosecutions of President Trump. Republicans, led by Chairman Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, are expected to level allegations at Smith that he brought political colonization charges against a leading presidential candidate to interfere with the 2024 election. Smith's appearance is going to mark the second time in as many months he's answered questions before the Republican-led committee after he's sat for an 8-hour deposition behind closed doors in December. We'll see how all that plays out. Well, an anti-ICE Minnesota church protester, and my system just started doing crazy things. Once again, an anti-ICE Minnesota church protester denies protesters rushed the service despite previous comments. Nakima Levy Armstrong, one of the organizers of the storming of a Minnesota church to protest U.S. immigration and customs enforcement on Sunday, denied she and her group tried to rush the church on CNN, despite previous comments suggesting otherwise. Armstrong appeared on CNN's Erin Burnett Out Front Wednesday when she was asked about whether the Justice Department had contacted her since threatening a crackdown on the protesters. She said she's not been contacted by the Justice Department despite the media attention, but she wanted to correct the record on her protest. She said, "We didn't rush into that church. We actually went and sat down and participated in the service, and after the pastor prayed, that's when I stood up and asked him a question in response to his prayer. And then he responded to me, and then I proceeded to ask him about the Pastor David Easterwood and how it's possible for him to serve as both the pastor and director of ICE for Minnesota." And she said, instead of responding to me, as soon as I said the name Easterwood, the pastor said, "Shame, shame," and that's when I led us in chants, "Justice for Renee Good," and "Hands up, don't shoot." So I want to clarify, we didn't rush in. We didn't bust in. We were part of the service until I got up and posed a question to the pastor. Well, Somali-born activist praises President Trump's stark warning at the Davos speech. Called it priority number one. After President Trump took to the World Economic Forum stage in Davos to declare that Western civilization must defend itself from existential attack, Somali-born activist and author Ayan Hirsi Ali said Trump is right. Trump shocked other politicians and leaders gathered in Switzerland Tuesday night by declaring the West can't mass import foreign cultures. The situation in Minnesota reminds us that the West can't mass foreign culture that have failed to ever build a successful society of their own. We're talking about people from Somalia, and Somalia is a failed state. It's not a nation. It doesn't have a government, doesn't have police, doesn't have a military. It's got nothing. The explosion of prosperity and conclusion and the progress that built the West didn't come from our tax cuts. Ultimately came from our very special culture. This is the precious inheritance that America and Europe here have in common. We share it, and we have to keep it strong. We have to become stronger, more successful, more prosperous than ever. He said we have to defend the culture and rediscover the spirit that lifted the West from the depths of the Dark Ages to the pinnacle of human development. And, of course, the left continued to have its meltdown. Well, President Trump slams UK island handoff deal that could put a key U.S. military base at risk. President Trump dramatically reversed course Tuesday on a UK plan to transfer sovereignty of the Chagos Islands and Mauritius, while warning it could jeopardize U.S. access to the Diego Garcia military base. Trump's reversal highlights what a defense expert called a new Trump doctrine before linking the president's opposition to the Chagos deal with his Greenland push and citing fears Mauritius could later back out. Writing on his True Social platform Tuesday, Trump called the UK's Chagos decision an act of great stupidity. Shockingly, our brilliant NATO ally, the United Kingdom, is currently planning to give away the island of Diego Garcia. That's the site of a vital U.S. military base to Mauritius, and to do so for no reason whatsoever. And there's no doubt that China and Russia have noticed this act of total weakness. So we'll see what happens if that continues. NYPD detectives were taken for ICE and treated rudely by hospital staff after a scuffle with a suspect. New York City detectives say they were treated rudely and disrespectfully last week after they were mistaken for federal immigration agents while seeking treatment at a hospital after an arrest. The officers went to NYU's Langone Cobble Hill Hospital in Brooklyn after a fight with a drug suspect, according to the New York Post. Hospital staff were nasty to the officers in the waiting room, accused them of being iced, and suggested they go elsewhere. That's according to one source familiar with the incident in a statement to the newspaper. The officers promptly identified themselves, another source said. It's despicable to attempt to deny care, suggest to go elsewhere. And NYPD spokesperson told Fox News the hospital apologized to Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch over the incident. Representatives from the hospital apologized to Commissioner Tisch and NYPD and said hospital staff had a misunderstanding of their policy. That's according to a spokesperson. Commissioner Tisch asked that all hospital staff be retrained to ensure that this type of incident doesn't happen again. Well, they're not the Lone Ranger in mistreating patients. I've had the same scenario with the VA. They seem to feel that they're doing a favor to the veterans, giving them treatment. Well, Erica Kirk has invoked Rachel Maddow's comments on anti-ICE protests linked to revival following her husband's murder. Turning Point USA CEO Erica Kirk took sunrise inspiration from comments made by liberal MS Now host Rachel Maddow, drawing a parallel between the ongoing anti-ICE protest and revival that has taken place following her husband's assassination. Speaking at the kickoff to TPUSA's Faith inaugural Make Heaven Crowded tour in Los Angeles on Wednesday, Kirk cited an exchange Maddow had with late night host Jimmy Kimmel earlier this month. She said was shared in a group chat with the Charlie Kirk Show staff. According to what she told the crowd at LA's Harvest Church, I can't even believe I'm saying their names in a church. In the exchange, Kimmel asked Maddow whether she believed anything would come from the protests that have erupted against the Trump administration, to which Maddow responded, yes, she does. In political science terms, that's what's called the 3.5% rule. And that's when you look at the authoritarian regimes of various kinds all over the world over the last century. Once you have 3.5% of the population protesting nonviolently against a dictator and authoritarian, that's essentially an unstoppable force that they can't oppose and precludes them from consolidating dictatorial power. Interestingly enough, these late-night talk show hosts seem to feel anybody who doesn't agree with them is a dictator. Well, Barron Trump reportedly saved a woman's life after witnessing a violent assault on a FaceTime call. Woman said she was violently attacked by her ex-boyfriend last year. She told a London court that her friend Barron Trump unexpectedly saved her life after she managed to call him during the assault. That's according to UK's media outlet Metro. After answering the FaceTime call and witnessing the assault, the 19-year-old son of President Trump reportedly contacted emergency operators and prompting UK police to respond to the scene on January 18th, 2025, shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning. The woman, who can't be named, reportedly claimed that her former Russian partner, 22-year-old Matvey Rumyanstev of East London, was jealous of her friendship with Trump. She said she was raped on the day she called Trump, alleged her ex-boyfriend first became violent 6 months into their relationship, had a history of assaulting her, including stranglings and, yes, according to Metro, citing hearings at Snaresbrook Crown Court. According to body cam footage from the day of the alleged attack, Trump was heard over the phone telling officials, I just saw a ceiling and I could hear her screaming. I could see a guy's head on the phone, and then the camera turned to her crying and getting hit. And Trump, who repeatedly attempted to call his friend for a casual conversation before finally receiving a call back, said the call only lasted about 10 or 15 seconds, after which he contacted the authorities. So at least he was effective in getting her help. Well, a Texas chain has crushed Costco and Trader Joe's to claim America's top grocery store title. The study surveyed over 11,000 shoppers as consumers face mounting financial pressure from rising food prices. It's a Texas-based chain that's once again been named America's top grocery store, beating out major competitors including Amazon and Costco and Trader Joe's. Its San Antonio-based H-E-B, was ranked the number one grocery retailer in the U.S. for the 5th time in 9 years, according to dunnhumby's latest annual rankings of grocery stores. It's a family-owned company that was founded in 1905 and operates more than 440 stores. And it's firmly entrenched in the top retailer due to its superior ability to deliver a combination of better savings, quality, experience, and assortment, according to the study. I've never been in one of those. I have to check it out. Well, Iran has been accused of sex assaults on teenage prisoners while families exchanged or charged to recover remains of loved ones. Reports have emerged from eyewitnesses in Iran alleging sexual assaults on teenagers held in custody, as well as authorities forcing families of those protesters killed to pay as much as 10 billion rials to recover the bodies. National Council of Resistance of Iran told Fox News Wednesday that the barbarity continues across the nation, with prison detainees abruptly being killed and their bodies burned. These reports come as Iran's government claimed it has successfully crushed weeks of unrest that had swept the country. If you'll remember, beginning December 28th, the protests erupted amid deep public anger over political repression and economic hardship and state violence before rapidly expanding nationwide. Doesn't mean it's over. It just means at the moment it's been crushed. Well, the Indiana judge shooting leaves a long list of potential suspects days into the manhunt, according to a defense attorney. Criminal defense attorney says Indiana police have to work through a long list of potential suspects as investigators try to identify the individual who shot a judge and his wife at their home. Even being one of God's anointed doesn't keep you from being on the receiving end of gunshots. Dispatch audio obtained by Fox News shows that the unidentified shooter had been caught by police yet allegedly knocked on the front door of Judge Stephen Meyer and his wife Kimberly Meyer's home. This was about 2:15 in the afternoon on Sunday, and then fired gunshots through the door. Before firing the gun, the suspect apparently said, "We have your dog," according to the audio. Stephen sustained an arm injury and Kimberly had a hip injury. They were taken to a hospital where they were recovering in a stable condition, according to the Lafayette Police Department. Police don't say how many shots were fired, but shell casings were found at the scene. Lafayette Police Department, Indiana State Police, Tippecanoe County Sheriff's Office, the West Lafayette Police Department, and the FBI are involved in the investigation. I have to wonder if it wasn't one of God's anointed, would there be a lot of attention being paid to it? According to Judge Meyer, in a statement Wednesday, "I'm so grateful for the outpouring of support from friends, the community, court colleagues, and law enforcement. I want to express my heartfelt thanks to my medical team. I'm receiving excellent care and I'm improving. Kim is also deeply appreciative for the community support, and she's healing as well." Well, experts have flipped the script on the narrative that ICE is preventing Minnesota patients from getting medical care. Former immigration judge and policy expert said sanctuary policies, not law enforcement, are preventing treatments in response to reports that Minnesota doctors are concerned their patients aren't receiving medical care because of ICE operations in the state. Minnesota State Tribune reported on a news conference held by Democratic lawmakers and various doctors who claim their patients are missing out on critical care due to their fear of ICE. Medical providers speaking during the press conference claimed that out of fear, both illegal immigrants and U.S. citizens are skipping on medical care, including diabetes treatment, checkups, and even giving birth, according to the outlet. In response, the outlet reported that the Department of Homeland Security spokesman Tricia McLaughlin said ICE does not conduct enforcement at hospitals, period. Andrew Arthur, who is a law and policy fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies, further backed this up. He told Fox News there had not been any reports that ICE has gone into any medical facility, any hospital, any clinic, or any doctor's office. Now, if the concern is that when somebody's traveling to one of these facilities, there also aren't any ICE roadblocks being set up to check in everybody for their status. So it's not like they're going to be looking for them in that context. Well, there's a rare filing in the Lisa Cook Trump case that could sway the Supreme Court justices. A rare filing from economic heavyweights could shape how Supreme Court justices view the limits of presidential control over the Federal Reserve and U.S. monetary policy. On Wednesday, the nation's highest court heard oral arguments for 2 hours on whether President Trump has the authority to remove Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. That debate has drawn an extraordinary amicus brief from some of the most influential figures in U.S. economic policy. An amicus brief is a submission by a group not directly involved in a suit that offers information, expertise, or arguments to help a court decide the matter. Signed by every living former chair of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, and Janet Yellen, well as 6 former Treasury secretaries who served presidents of both parties. And this group, which also includes 7 former White House economic advisors, spans roughly 50 years of U.S. economic policy making. This type of intervention is almost unheard of, according to as former Fed chairs and Treasury secretaries typically steer clear of public legal battles. We'll see how all that plays out, if it does. Well, President Trump is leaving Davos with a deal. Another success in his long line of successes since he was returned to office. First prison sentences have been dealt in the NBA illegal betting scandal. First prison sentence has been dealt and related to the wide-ranging NBA betting scandal that rocked the sport in the fall. Timothy McCormick was sentenced to a New York federal judge Wednesday to 2 years in prison, according to ESPN. He said at the sentencing, "I've struggled with a gambling addiction for more than half my life." He was charged with defrauding sports betting platforms by using non-public information to place highly profitable wagers tied to the performance of NBA players allegedly in on the scheme. According to federal judge LaShawn D.R.C. Hall, he has an addiction. I don't believe the conduct Mr. McCormick engaged in defines him. But whether it does or not, he's still going to jail. Well, Prince William's bulletproof sunshine fixer marks a turning point in the royal family, according to experts. He's quietly hired a new staffer nicknamed Bulletproof Sunshine to help future-proof his reign. That claim was made by British broadcaster and photographer Helena Chard, who told Fox News that Prince and Princess of Wales are intent on protecting the monarchy from future scandals. A few sources have suggested that Lisa Ravenscoff's background in crisis management is the real reason she was hired. And the timing is notable, given the recent royal challenges as ex-Prince Andrew's fall from grace, the ongoing rift with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and growing financial scrutiny of the monarch. Protecting William and Kate from intense media scrutiny and protecting the monarchy is a calculated, proactive move, according to Chard. We'll see if it has any positive aspect to it. Well, on that move, or on that note, rather, let us move to our story for today. You know, we've been talking about Area 51 and S4 and all these different groups. And certainly there have been a lot of stories coming out of these areas. You know, we live in a massive, mysterious universe. A lot of things we simply don't understand. But there are often strange clues that seem to be hidden all around us if we just look for them. And whether it's a smudge in a cocktail napkin that bears a striking resemblance to a patron saint or some glitch in the matrix that makes us question reality itself, always seems to be something that the human mind might grasp onto in its never-ending quest for meaning. Well, I've often heard the question asked, why we don't go back to the moon? And there's long been a story that the Apollo astronauts were warned off of the moon. Now, for those who have an avid interest in space exploration and have followed the history of the space program, it's long been a source of frustration that NASA never returned to the moon after Apollo 11 landed there July 1969. Recent years, fresh talks have been underway to make a return, but now that we're halfway through the 2020s and are still, as of right now, waiting for that fateful return, it makes folks wonder, why did it take so long? Why didn't you just keep going to the moon after that first few landings? And because for those who know the history, let alone folks who are old enough to have actually lived through it, when Apollo astronauts landed on the moon in 1969 and continued to do so throughout the early 1970s, it was oddly anticlimactic when those landings suddenly stopped. It was like a crew of eager mountain climbers reaching the top of Mount Everest, only to declare they'd never go back there again. It just seemed odd. I mean, why spend all that money and all those resources to get to the moon and never go back? Now, the official reasoning, of course, given by NASA is, of course, rather mundane and largely chalked up to budgetary constraints and a change in priorities. I mean, let's face it, folks, it took a lot of money to go to the moon, and by the stagflation of the late 70s, the expenditure just seemed too great. But the question becomes, is that really true? Going to the moon hadn't really gotten any cheaper. But suddenly in the 2020s, the Artemis program has brought on a certain surge of interest on the moon exploration. It costs just as much money to go to the moon now as it did back then. I mean, it does when you count for inflation. So why the sudden urge to go back? Well, the other reason NASA gives us for this sudden, seemingly abandonment of the moon last century is simply a shift in priorities at the time. In a lot of ways, the moonshot was a desperate bid to beat the Russians to the moon. And once the Americans won the so-called space race and beat the Russians to the lunar surface, the competition just ended. Both Russia and America began to look elsewhere to demonstrate their respective supremacy. No longer worried about the Russian cosmonauts building bases on the moon, NASA shifted its attention to reusable space shuttles and eventually built the International Space Station. Eventually, the shuttles were scrapped, and now private rockets or the likes of SpaceX rule the roost and are at the forefront of a renewed push to return to the moon in the 2020s. And this return is partially fueled by China's emergence as a space power and its own determination to claim the moon as Chinese real estate. I mean, the official narrative would have us believe that a brand new space race is now afoot, and that's why we're picking up where we all left off. That's at least the official history that we know. But the question is that what really happened? Because there's been a long-standing rumor that something entirely and shockingly different occurred during those first few fateful moon landings. There's a conspiracy theory that when the astronauts landed, they had company. That's right, it's been suggested from various shadowy sources there were aliens there, complete with a huge spacecraft, parked on the moon when the Apollo astronauts arrived on the surface. And according to conspiracy theorists, the reason why this shocking welcome committee was not seen on television during the famed broadcast of the moon landing was because it was withheld from the public. Conspiracy theorists claim that what folks saw on their TV was either highly edited, fabricated, or both. Now, this is an interesting conspiracy theory in itself because it dovetails into the infamous moon landing was fake conspiracy theory. Well, the traditional fake moon landing theory says that the whole thing was fake and nobody ever landed on the moon at all. We were warned off, conspiracy theory differs a little bit is that it borrows a little bit of both worlds. And while it doesn't deny Apollo landed on the moon and insists that some of the footage shown to the public really was fake, UFO researcher Stephen Greer talks about this in his book, Unacknowledged, Expose on the World's Greatest Secret. And in the book, he brings up the fact that when the Apollo astronauts were seen struggling to place a flag on the moon's surface on July 20th, 1969, the flag appears to move and flap about as if it was caught in a gust of wind. Now, this makes for a heroic, even patriotic moment as those American astronauts, who are also military veterans, salute the U.S. flag on the lunar surface. But there is, of course, a big problem with the notion that a freshly planted flag on the moon is flapping in the breeze because there is no breeze on the moon. The moon has no real atmosphere to speak of, so there shouldn't have been any wind blowing the flag around. And Greer does point to this as evidence that the flag planting segment of footage just might have been pre-recorded, not just on the moon, but on the Earth before the astronauts left. But if the moon landing itself was real, why was this part faked? Well, according to Greer, NASA discovered alien bases on the far side of the moon before the astronauts ever left the Earth. Alien bases on the moon, that's the discovery of the century. Surely this would have been headline news. And even if you weren't too keen to believe any of the conspiracy theories about alien cover-ups, it wouldn't be too hard to imagine NASA being hesitant to immediately rush forward news about the discovery of alien artifacts without first considering what the ramifications for the public might be. In fact, NASA at its inception was specifically advised not to do that. And it's now well known that in 1960, just prior to NASA embarking on manned space exploration, they commissioned the Brookings Institute. And the Brookings Report was a detailed research paper written by a prestigious think tank. This esteemed analysts and researchers were tasked with brainstorming the right approach and contingency plans should NASA encounter either aliens or artifacts of an alien civilization. Well, the Brookings Report advised keeping the information from the public. And that's not a conspiracy theory, folks. That is a fact. Paid for with your tax dollars, but you couldn't know what was in it. The report starts off openly speculating about the possibility of not just alien life, but the artifacts they might have left behind throughout the solar system and beyond. According to what the report said, it is conceivable that there's a semi-intelligent life in some part of our solar system, or highly intelligent life which is not technologically oriented, and many cosmologists and astronomers think it's very likely that there is intelligent life. It's very likely in other solar systems. While face-to-face meetings with it will not occur within the next 20 years unless its technology is much more advanced than ours, qualifying it to visit the Earth, artifacts left at some point in time by these life forms might possibly be discovered through our space activities on the Moon, Mars, or Venus. Well, this report, which was compiled at the start of the space program, is not stating aliens actually exist. It's merely suggesting the possibility that they exist. Now, this is a think tank group commissioned by NASA, after all, and their job was not to go out and prove the existence of extraterrestrials, but to merely think about the potential implications of these discoveries. Without going into the exact word for word text, and the report then basically suggested a discovery of alien civilizations or another planetary body, whether a moon or an actual other planet, would shake society to its core. It might be a good idea to withhold the information from the public, but the exact ramifications of that discovery could be better understood. Well, NASA acknowledges that the report was completed by the think tank, but insists that although such recommendations were made, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily abided by them. Now, Greer insists that since NASA was indeed quite spooked when they first cited possible alien structures on the moon and decided to abide by the recommendations of the Brookings Report after all. They didn't know what might happen when the Apollo astronauts arrived, so they filmed a fake moon landing in a studio right here on Earth, so they could quickly switch to this more prosaic footage if necessary. This is supposedly the preferred fallback presentation rather than treating the American public to a shocking live feed of aliens waltzing right up to the Apollo astronauts, which would have been somewhat anticlimactic, shall we say. Now, this is admittedly far-fetched, and for a few reasons. Despite the obvious bizarre notion of aliens and alien bases on the moon, it seems to be a bit of a stretch that NASA would send humans to the moon, knowing that potentially hostile aliens were on the surface. Now, as mentioned earlier, these were actually hardcore military men, the astronauts, but still, would NASA really embark on such a risky venture without knowing how the aliens might react? Now, these were brave men, and NASA was indeed hell-bent to get to the moon before the Russians, so anything is possible. But if it's true, the risk taken is hard to fathom. But if we keep an open mind and entertain the possibility, there's another interesting facet to this. If NASA really wants to determine to get to the moon that they'd hurl astronauts into a potential lion's den of hostile aliens on the lunar surface, it's worth noting alternative speeches were known to exist of what an American president might say should a moon mission prove fatal. And the text of this alternative speech doesn't mention aliens, but in the case of a crash or some other conventional fatal failure of the mission, the words were written to address the deaths of astronauts. And in those heady days of moon exploration, it seems all the bases were in fact covered and all contingencies were considered well ahead of time, just in case something unpredictable did happen. So it wouldn't be impossible to think that NASA might have taken some extreme measures to get to the moon and were prepared for things beyond the imagination of most of us. In any case, Stephen Greer's take on what might have happened is indeed incredible to comprehend, because he claims the astronauts were in fact confronted by aliens on the lunar surface. According to Greer, the Apollo astronauts were immediately made aware of a large craft parked at the edge of a distant crater near their landing site. Not only that, the aliens were roving about in ETVs. I guess you could say it was the ET equivalent of an ATV on the lunar surface. Apparently, right after the astronauts were aware of this activity, NASA cut the live televised feed and switched it to the pre-recorded stock footage showing astronauts peacefully hopping about on the surface of the moon. It's believed by a lot of people that those films were actually made in Nevada, and they planted a flag in the sandy soil. And although the footage was cut, ham radio operators allegedly still picked up some of the audio transmissions and supposedly heard the astronauts referencing aliens. Now, these references were first made in code, referring to these beings, there being a Santa Claus and bogies on the moon, but then more blatant references to alien craft were also heard, as well as the continuous remarks about how they're here and they're watching us. Apparently, nobody thought to record these transmissions at the time, and they've since, if they ever existed, disappeared into the ether. But this conspiracy theory would gain more traction in the 1990s when it was claimed that the late, great Neil Armstrong once openly admitted he and his fellow Apollo astronauts were indeed confronted by aliens on the lunar surface. According to what Armstrong had to say, he cited this as the real reason why astronauts never went back to the moon. He supposedly remarked to a friend, quite frankly, we were warned off. This is apparently the whole basis of the conspiracy theory that ETs, who were already making use of property on the Earth's moon, told American astronauts in no uncertain terms to get off the moon and not come back. And that's certainly a much more exciting a reason for the several decades absence on the moon than the more logical, practical reasoning behind the delay we've been told. But if one understood history and logistics, complicated policy of governments, and a whole plethora of other reasons, they might reconsider. Christopher Columbus, for example, first landed in the Americas in 1492. Now, in 1492, that was an incredible feat back then, almost akin to the moon landings, and required tremendous financing and resources. Made a few follow-up missions, just like the Apollo astronauts did, but over the next few decades, exploration in the Americas was a bit of a hit-and-miss situation. It wasn't until the 1520s that European exploration and colonization of the Americas really ramped up. Took decades after the initial landing to really get a footing in the Americas. Because this be the same thing about the moon. Humans landed in 1969, did a few follow-up missions, and it took several decades to get our footing well enough to establish a permanent presence in hopefully the late 2020s. That'd be the more prosaic, logical explanation, but it's certainly not as exciting as aliens warning Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin off the moon. Knowing Buzz Aldrin, he probably had a few choice words for these pesky aliens who dared to accuse him of trespassing. He probably shouted at him, what, your moon? Malarkey, this is my moon, before the folks at NASA reined him in. Well, at this point in time, Artemis is scheduled to send a few generations of astronauts circling the moon in 2026. Maybe landing them there in 2028. I mean, we can keep our fingers crossed, of course, and hope they don't face any unexpected encounters with territorial ETs banishing from the moon's surface. But it'd be interesting to note that I've heard about a lot of recordings of comments made by astronauts that they didn't know were being recorded. Well, another question. Let's talk about Enoch and Noah and the fallen ones, and ask, do some of us have traces of interdimensional angels in our DNA? I've heard a number of discussions about that. In the book of Genesis, for example, you find one of the strangest sets of verses in the Bible, Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Reading between the lines, these verses seem to suggest that otherworldly entities crossbred with human beings. In a modern perspective, this sounds more akin to stories of alien abduction than holy discourse. UFO lore has long been filled with claims that aliens from other worlds are abducting people, extracting genetic material, and creating hybrid creatures that are half human and half alien. And then right here in Genesis, the Bible seems to suggest the same thing. The only real difference is the terminology being used. Back when Genesis was written, of course, humanity had no concept of aliens. Humanity had no concept that there were other planets from which aliens might visit. In fact, humans had no way of even knowing that they themselves were on a planet. Most people back then thought the Earth was flat. They didn't know that their sandaled feet walked around a round ball of a planet that orbited one star, among trillions and trillions of other stars, which also have planets orbiting them. So this is by no means to suggest that the Bible's wrong or to denigrate the beliefs of those who feel the Scripture is divinely inspired. The Bible could very well be completely inspired by God and still reflect the limited understanding of those who were divinely inspired, who wrote these divinely inspired words. Because unless God sat down with the prophets and painstakingly explained everything, from the roundness of the earth to quantum physics, divinely inspired or not, the words reflect the limited understanding of the writers at the time. This means that beings from non-human intelligence suddenly dropped down on planet Earth. Our shocked ancient human witnesses had no way of knowing they might have hailed from some other planet, from some far-flung star system. They could very well have been the same kind of aliens folks talk about today. But for them, in ancient times, they would have been the messengers or angels from the heavens. And they were seen coming from above, so for them, that likely meant they were divine, or at least at one point were divine before they fell from grace. Moving beyond the potential similarities between what these biblical verses describe and the modern-day claims of alien abduction and crossbreeding with aliens, there's a good conspiracy theory. Now, these verses, also only briefly alluded to in Genesis, have long sparked tremendous debates and fascination. Thousands of years ago, scholars of Judaism were fascinated by them, as well as references to a patriarch named Enoch who seemingly vanished without a trace. There's another vague biblical musing that seems to suggest that God raptured Enoch up to the heavens while he was yet still alive. Somewhere along the way, more detailed stories about the brief biblical mention of both the Nephilim as well as Enoch emerged and converged in the so-called Book of Enoch. Although not considered official scripture, this book does detail how supposed fallen angels, at least from their perspective, arrived on earth and interbred with human women to create hybrid creatures. It's a fantastical story, and we don't need to go into every detail of it at this point in time, but one of the most shocking parts of it is in regard to Enoch's great-grandson, Noah. There's a startling reference to Noah's birth in which Noah's father, Lamech, is shocked at the appearance of his son. The son is described as having light blonde hair and white, almost rose-tinted skin. And that probably didn't sound like something unusual to us today, but it does sound like something unusual to somebody who hails from Scandinavia. The thing to keep in mind, though, was in the Book of Enoch was written by Middle Eastern people in the Middle East, whose genetic traits like that were apparently not too common at that time. And from how the Book of Enoch describes the reaction of Lamech and everybody else who saw Noah, these features were most certainly not common to them, and Noah looked unlike anything they expected to see. Or as Lamech put it, I've begotten a strange son. He's not like an ordinary human being. He looks like the children of the angels of heaven to me. His form is different, and he's not like us. It doesn't seem to me he's of me, but of angels. Well, Lamech was so certain of this fact, he immediately began accusing his wife of having slept with angels. His wife, Bathernos, swore that this wasn't true, or at least she never remembered an encounter with an angel. And that brings up another startling clue for conspiracy theorists to look at. Because if today's alien encounters and encounters with otherworldly visitors in the ancient past are similar events, could be that Lamech's wife was either unconscious when the otherworldly entities impregnated her, or they wiped her memory of the event. Shades of MK Ultra. Because in modern alien abduction accounts, that's precisely what abductees claimed has happened. It's a common trope of alien abduction narratives for the human to be taken aboard a craft either in an altered conscious state or have some of their memories wiped out entirely. In any case, Lamech's poor wife swore she didn't remember being with any angels and insisted the child was Lamech's, even though he looked nothing at all like Lamech. Well, that story narrates how Lamech remained troubled until Enoch confirmed the son was indeed his, but merely had the mark of the divine on him as a sign he'd lead his people through a terrible calamity. That calamity was also known as the future flood. There's something that seems strangely lacking about this comment. Builds up at the start with Lamech's great shock that something's obviously very different about Noah. It's then almost anticlimactic when the narrative ends with Lamech being reassured that despite the oddity of his son's appearance, he was indeed his own son. No other explanation for this occurrence is given other than it was a divine appointment of destiny. Now, Lamech's reaction, as well as the reaction of his wife and others around him, make it clear that this kind of angelic intervention in human lives was indeed a possibility. His wife, Bathernos, vehemently denied it, but she didn't do so on the ground it was bogus. For her, it was apparently a very real trespass that she was being accused of. She did everything she could to assure her husband she didn't have an extramarital affair. I can't talk. Even with an angel. Although Noah was apparently later in the clear, the book of Enoch narrates that this phenomenon of interbreeding between humans and angels throughout. Enoch, in fact, affirms that the real reason for the flood wasn't the everyday sinfulness of humanity, but to wipe the earth clean of the angelic hybrids that were terrorizing the planet. In fact, the book of Enoch explains the great deluge is simply the drastic measures that are being taken to correct a very drastic situation. Well, were these half-human, half-angels entirely wiped out, or could their DNA still lurk in the veins of some of us? There are some conspiracy theorists who believe that this is a possibility. And they point to a lot of various alleged proofs that they say they've uncovered. One of these is the rare blood group known as Rh negative. Now, most people on planet Earth have Rh positive blood, but there's a rare subgroup that affects about 10% of humans known as Rh negative blood. And there's no scientific explanation for this difference in blood types, but it holds some very odd irregularities when compared to the rest of humanity. For one thing, Rh negative women have great difficulty bearing children from Rh positive men. Their body reacts to an Rh positive baby as if it was a virus and tries to kill it. Their blood's actually reacting to the Rh positive blood of the fetus they carry and actively creates antibodies to attack it. Women with immune systems programmed to kill their own babies. I mean, that's certainly unusual. It's a very strange situation. To this very day, it's only with immunosuppressing drugs that Rh negative women can carry Rh positive babies to full term. Well, without modern medicine, Rh negative women would seem relegated to only be able to successfully procreate with their other Rh negatives. But the big question becomes, why would this be the case? If it's a natural phenomenon, why would certain humans evolve to only be able to procreate with certain other humans and immediately physically reject embryos conceived with unions from those who are not Rh negative? It's actually a strange piece of the puzzle, and some conspiracy theorists believe these unusual features are a mark of genetic interference between humans and non-human entities. Could those with Rh negative blood have some remnants of DNA left over from otherworldly visitors from the past? The interesting fact in all this is that some reports from UFO researchers contend that a very large portion of those who claim to be alien abductees in the modern era have Rh negative blood type. Could it be that angels, also known as alien genetic benefactors, have taken a renewed interest in some of their stock? As far as conspiracy theories go, this is one that is both ancient, shocking, and apparently, for at least according to those who believe in alien abductions, one that's still circulating in the 21st century. Well, turning from the possibility of aliens impregnating humans, let's talk about a conspiracy that I remember got a lot of traction when I was younger. The Paul McCartney conspiracy. Many people ask, is Paul dead? That's a weird thing to say about a guy considered to be well into his 80s and still going strong. In fact, John Lennon immortalized this insane drama with the Paul is Dead conspiracy best in the song, How Do You Sleep at Night? Well, that song was a classic Lennon solo number, written shortly after the Beatles broke up. The breakup was one fueled by animosity and antagonism between Paul and John, and this song certainly takes a dig at Paul McCartney. Written during a time when the two former Beatles were at odds and frequently shared barbs with each other. But along with lyrically roughing up his former bandmate in this song, Lennon actually references the conspiracy theory that Paul died in a car crash and was replaced by a lookalike. And Lennon touches on this in his raspy, hoarse-sounding voice by belting out the verse, those freaks were right when they said you was dead. The one mistake you made was in your head. He was a poet and didn't know it. Well, the printed word doesn't really do the same justice. You have to hear Lennon's bluesy, plaintive snarl to really get a feel for it. But John Lennon's mention of those freaks is a reference to nutty conspiracy theorists who began circulating rumors that Paul McCartney died in a car crash and was subsequently replaced in a lookalike contest. Rather than this being a typical admission on Lennon's part, though, most who listened to the song, if they even understood the reference, realized that Lennon was liked to being sarcastic, leading to his own dead relationship with a former bandmate. Now, some conspiracy theorists don't hesitate to take the song lyrics at face value and shout from the rooftops, Paul is dead, and even John admitted it. Well, the Lennon tune, in which they claim is an open admission, was recorded in 1971 for John Lennon's Imagine album. Conspiracy theory of Paul being dead first emerged just a couple of years before that, in 1969. Same year we supposedly landed on the moon. The conspiracy theory itself claimed that Paul died back in 1966, but greedy record company managers, not wanting any interference in music revenue due to the death of a band member, cooked up a scheme in which they quietly replaced Paul without anybody knowing it. Or so this twisted conspiracy theory reports. It's a really odd conspiracy theory, hence Lennon referring to those who crafted it as freaks. But as odd as this one is, it does have staying power. Recently, as November 2025, Paul McCartney himself spoke at length about it. Made some rather bizarre headlines when he stated that the conspiracy theory was actually true. And our world is full of all manner of clickbait, but when one's circling and scrolling through their phone, one fine morning said headlines like Paul really was dead, or so Paul McCartney himself admits. Well, that headline was seen by a number of people. From an article highlighting a recent interview with Sir Paul McCartney himself. Besides the absurdity of somebody admitting he really are dead, you have to be very careful about jumping to conclusions. Because you just scroll further and read the interview in full, you find that Paul's actually waxing philosophically about how in many ways he really did feel dead at the time. I mean, at the same time, those conspiratorial freaks were actually making such claims. So in essence, Paul is agreeing with Lennon's own assessment. He was dead in a metaphorical sense, not a literal one. McCartney revealed in the interview that by 1969, with the Beatles on the verge of breaking up and so many things going wrong in his life, he did feel dead inside. Only to be reborn in many ways in the 70s as he rediscovered himself as an artist as well as a person. And now, contrary to being dead, Paul McCartney's gone on to be a quite long-lived Beatle now in his 80s. Nevertheless, this conspiracy theory just never seems to go away. Well, there's another conspiracy theory I've only heard a couple of times. Are birds fake? This is also known as the birds aren't real conspiracy. Now, conspiracy theories, of course, in many cases are just downright weird. They got folks pointing to everyday reality and suddenly declaring they see strings attached. They see some hidden feature at work that everybody else seems to miss. The earth is flat, the moon landings weren't real, the birds are fake. Well, it turns out that this particular conspiracy theory actually started out as a complete joke. Ironically, this theory is actually born as a satirical poke at conspiracy theorists themselves. The idea was to point at something that most people would have no problem believing is real and legit, like a bird happily flapping its wings through the sky and claiming it was surrounded by conspiracy. And so it was that jokesters started promoting what they intended to be a fake conspiracy that involved around birds not being real. But the funny thing about conspiracy theories is that what's a joke to one person can be taken quite seriously by somebody else. And since then, this conspiracy theory, despite its joke origins, has taken on a life of its own. And there are those out there who seriously believe it's true. Now that we've explained how a fake conspiracy theory about birds not being real became a serious concept to some people, let's talk about what the conspiracy theory actually says. In this goofy idea, the U.S. government quietly killed off all, or at least most, of America's natural bird population and replaced them with robotic bird drones. And these bird drones supposedly utilized by the deep reaches of the government to spy on people. In other words, Big Brother's at it again. This time he's got bird power on his side. And one of the funnier and even quite inventive claims in this goofy conspiracy theory is that the reason why birds are always sitting on power lines is because that's actually how the robot bird drones recharge their batteries. Such conspiracy theories also insist that these birds usually go back to headquarters at night to recharge as well as dump data. And that's why you rarely see birds after the sun goes down. I mean, let's face it, folks, you can't make this type of stuff up. Some of it's just absolutely hysterical. Birds aren't real conspiracy theorists also insist when a bird poops on a car, it's actually dropping a liquefied tracking device. So when a sudden streak of what you thought was bird poop drips down your windshield, consider yourself tagged and tracked, and courtesy of the federal government. Other funny allegations made by bird conspiracy buffs is that the bird flu and sometimes used as a cover to scale back operations when mechanical birds get worn out or face some kind of defect and need to be temporarily recalled for repairs and updates. And there's also an idea that birds like crows and parrots that mimic human speech are not mimicking so much as suffering from glitches that cause them to replay sounds they've just recorded. Let's face it, all this is supposed to be a joke, but more and more people are starting to take it seriously. So much so that if one were to delve into the depths of Reddit, which is a scary place, let me be the first to tell you, they'll find folks in heated argument over whether this theory is real or not. Most might insist it's just a joke, but some will fire back that it is indeed a real conspiracy theory. This goes to show us once again how reality, or at least our version of it, really is what we make it. Well, from birds aren't real, we got another couple of minutes. I'm going to touch on another conspiracy that has gained a lot of traction over the years. The Princess Diana conspiracy. She was a modern-day princess, the wife of the prince, now King Charles, and was beloved by many. Also loved for the captivating combination of her stunning features with her charming personality. She was extremely popular with the public and seemed perfect for the role. Unfortunately, though, things just didn't work out between her and Charles, and the couple split and went their separate ways. That left Princess Diana royal adrift. But even so, she's still routinely in the headlines, not necessarily because she did anything to merit them, simply because paparazzi news hounds were constantly following her every movement in order to make those headlines. She was, in fact, fleeing from the paparazzi press when she met with a tragic incident that ended her life. But of course, not everybody believes it was an accident. It seems that almost as soon as the news over her death broke, there were folks out there suggesting maybe it wasn't an accident at all. Maybe she was murdered. She wasn't the only person to die that day. The boyfriend she was seeing at the time, Dodi Fayed, was also killed. His wealthy and ill-connected father, Mohammed Al-Fayed, was devastated by the loss of course. He too became an early proponent of the Princess Diana conspiracy. Mohammed was interested in knowing more about what British intelligence might know about Diana and Dodi's death. In fact, Mohammed, wondered if British intelligence might have been involved in it. His determined interest to dig up information on this subject led to a less than scrupulous character from Austria, crafting a bogus set of paperwork and falsely attributing it to the intelligence community. Rather than linking British intelligence, it seemed to link American intelligence to forming the CIA. And on that note, we've run out of time. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about what the CIA had to do with the death of Princess Diana. So until tomorrow at this time, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.